In the shadowed halls of the Byzantine Empire, where gold mosaics gleamed with a divine light and silk curtains concealed unspeakable secrets, there lived an empress whose very name could make senators tremble and bishops avert their eyes. Theodora Augusta, consort to Emperor Justinian II, rose from the lowest depths of Constantinople's underbelly to command an empire that stretched from Spain to Syria. But the path she walked to reach that golden throne was paved with degradation so profound, so systematically cruel, that even hardened historians struggle to reconcile the woman she became with the girl she was forced to be. The year was 500 AD when Theodora first drew breath in Constantinople, daughter to Acacius, a bearer for the Green faction at the Hippodromium. In this sprawling arena where 100,000 citizens gathered to watch chariot races and bloody spectacles, social hierarchy was as rigid as the stone seats that separated patricians from plebeians. When Acacius died suddenly, leaving behind a widow and 3 young daughters, the family's protector vanished like smoke in the Byzantine wind. The Greens, corrupted by bribes from rivals, refused to grant his position to Theodora's stepfather, casting the family into destitution. What followed was a descent into the darkest corners of Byzantine entertainment, where the line between performance and prostitution blurred beyond recognition. The Hippodromium of Constantinople was more than a racing venue. It was a microcosm of the empire's obsessions with power, violence, and carnal pleasure. By age 15, Theodora had become a fixture in the theatre's most notorious productions, performances that would make modern audiences recoil in horror. The historian Procopius, writing in his scandalous secret history, described scenes that challenge our understanding of human endurance and dignity. According to Procopius, Theodora's performances went far beyond conventional theatrical displays. She would appear on stage wearing nothing but a ribbon lying on her back while attendants scattered barley grains across her body. Trained geese would then peck the grains from her skin, in a grotesque parody of Lear and the Swan, while audiences of thousands watched with a mixture of arousal and revulsion. These were not isolated incidents, but regular performances repeated night after night before crowds that included senators, merchants, and foreign dignitaries. The degradation escalated beyond public humiliation. Prupius claims that Theodora would service 30 men in a single night, then turn to their servants when the masters were exhausted. She allegedly complained that nature had not equipped her with more orifices to satisfy the endless stream of clients. While Procopius's accounts are certainly coloured by his hatred for the imperial couple, archaeological evidence and contemporary sources confirm that such extreme sexual exhibitions were indeed part of Constantinople's theatrical underworld. The psychological impact of these experiences carved deep grooves into Theodora's psyche, creating a woman who understood power through the lens of sexual domination and submission. She learned that bodies were currency, that desire was weakness, and that those who controlled access to pleasure controlled everything. These lessons, branded into her consciousness through years of systematic abuse, would later manifest in the imperial palace in ways that shocked even the jaded Byzantine court. Yet something extraordinary happened within this crucible of degradation, where others might have shattered completely. Theodora began to observe, to study, to understand the mechanisms of power that moved beneath Constantinople's glittering surface. She watched how men revealed their deepest insecurities in moments of vulnerability, how their need for dominance masked profound inadequacies, how the powerful feared exposure more than death itself. Every violation became a lesson in human psychology, every humiliation a masterclass in the architecture of control. Her transformation began when she became the mistress of Beles, the Syrian governor of Pentapolis. For 4 years she lived in North Africa, removed from Constantinople's degrading stages. But when Beles discarded her, leaving her stranded and penniless in Alexandria, Theodora encountered Patriarch Timothy III and the Monophysite Christian community. Here among religious dissidents who themselves occupied the margins of Byzantine society, she discovered new forms of power, spiritual authority, intellectual discourse, and the strength found in systematic belief. The woman who returned to Constantinople in 522 AD bore little resemblance to the performer who had left. She had traded the theatre for a modest dwelling near the palace, supporting herself through wool spinning rather than her body. It was during this period of calculated reinvention that she caught the eye of Justinian, then heir apparent to the Byzantine throne. Their meeting was no accident. Theodora had positioned herself strategically, understanding that proximity to power required patience and planning. Justinian's attraction to Theodora scandalized the court. Byzantine law explicitly forbade men of senatorial rank from marrying actresses, a profession considered barely distinguishable from prostitution. But Justinian, already demonstrating the ambition that would later rebuild Hagia Sophia and reconquer the Western Empire, saw in Theodora something beyond her past. He recognized a kindred spirit, someone who understood that power was not inherited, but seized, not given, but taken. Their relationship developed through secret meetings in garden pavilions and coded messages delivered by trusted eunuchs. Theodora displayed an intellect sharpened by survival, a wit honed by years of reading human weakness, and a beauty that had survived the theater's brutal demands. She spoke multiple languages, understood theological disputes that divided the empire, and possessed an uncanny ability to remember names, faces, and the private scandals of everyone who mattered in Constantinople. When Emperor Justin I died in 527 AD, Justinian ascended to the purple, and Theodora stood beside him as Augusta, Empress of the Romans. The transformation was complete, or so it seemed. But the woman who wore the imperial diadem carried within her every moment of degradation, every forced performance, every violation that had marked her path to power. These experiences had not disappeared. They had metamorphosed into tools of governance. The imperial palace under Theodora became a stage for a different kind of performance. She instituted elaborate court ceremonies that forced senators and dignitaries to prostrate themselves completely, kissing her feet while she remained seated on her throne. These rituals, unprecedented in their requirement of total submission, echoed the power dynamics she had learned in the theatre, but with the positions reversed. Now she was the one who remained clothed in purple, silk, and gold, while others debased themselves for her favour. Her network of informants, largely composed of women she had rescued from situations similar to her own past, operated throughout Constantinople. These women stationed in bait house, brothel, and noble bedchambers reported every whisper of dissent, every secret liaison, every financial impropriety. Theodora had transformed the systematic exploitation she had endured into a systematic intelligence apparatus that made her the most well-informed person in the empire. The Empress's private quarters in the palace of Hormisdas became legendary for their mystery and forbidden pleasures. Select courtiers whispered of rooms where mirrors reflected infinite variations of debauched scenes, where exotic perfumes masked other scents, where beautiful young women and boys attended to desires that could not be spoken aloud. Yet these same chambers also housed Theodora's most revolutionary project, a monastery that she had converted into a sanctuary for women escaping prostitution. This sanctuary, called the Convent of Repentance, represented Theodora's most complex psychological projection. She gathered hundreds of former prostitutes and actresses, providing them with food, shelter, and religious instruction. But the regime was severe. The women were forbidden to leave, forced to abandon all connections to their former lives, required to spend their days in prayer and penitence. Some contemporary accounts claim that several women threw themselves from the convent's walls rather than endure this gilded imprisonment. The contradiction embodied Theodora's fractured psyche. She simultaneously saved and imprisoned these women, liberating them from sexual exploitation while subjecting them to another form of control. She could not bear to see others suffer as she had suffered. Yet she could not conceive of freedom outside the structures of domination she had internalized. The convent became a monument to her trauma, a place where salvation and subjugation intertwined inseparably. Theodora's influence on imperial legislation revealed similar paradoxes. She championed laws that protected women from forced prostitution, that granted them greater rights in divorce proceedings, that punished rape with death. Yet she also orchestrated the destruction of political enemies through sexually charged accusations, using the very stigmas she had fought against as weapons when it served her purposes. She understood that in Byzantine society, sexual shame was a political tool more powerful than any sword. The year 532 AD brought Theodora's defining moment. The Nar riots had erupted, threatening to topple Justinian's regime. As the palace burned and rebels proclaimed a new emperor in the Hippodromium, Justinian and his court prepared to flee. It was then that Theodora rose in the imperial council, delivering words that would echo through history. She declared that purple made the finest burial shroud, that imperial power was worth any risk, that she would rather die as empress than live as a fugitive. But beneath the famous rhetoric lay a deeper truth. Theodora was returning to the Hippodromium, not as a performer, but as an empress, not as victim, but as executioner, when Justinian's generals herded the rebels into that same arena, where she had once been degraded nightly, where 30,000 citizens were slaughtered in a single afternoon. Theodora watched from the imperial box. The circle had closed with blood. The stage where she had been consumed had become an altar for her revenge. Contemporary observers noted changes in Theodora after the massacre. She became more reclusive, more dependent on elaborate beauty regimens that required hours of bathing in exotic oils and milk. She slept until midday, conducted business only in carefully controlled lighting, and required all visitors to wait for hours or even days before granting audiences. Some historians interpret these behaviours as signs of deepening mental illness, while others see them as calculated displays of power, forcing the empire to operate on her schedule. The palace under Theodora's influence became a labyrinth of psychological manipulation and sexual intrigue. She established a court where traditional gender roles dissolved into a carefully orchestrated performance of power. Male courtiers were required to wear elaborate cosmetics and silk robes that feminized their appearance, while she surrounded herself with masculine women trained in combat and administration. This deliberate confusion of gender norms reflected her understanding that identity itself was performance, that power came from controlling how others perceived themselves. Her most trusted advisor was Antonina, wife of the general Belisarius, a woman whose own history of sexual scandal and manipulation made her Theodora's perfect accomplice. Together they orchestrated elaborate entrapments of political enemies, using beautiful young men and women as bait in scenarios that would destroy reputations and careers. These operations were planned with military precision, with Theodora maintaining detailed records of every senator's sexual preferences, every general's secret vices, every bishop's hidden desires. The Empress's personal guard consisted entirely of eunuchs she had personally selected and mutilated men who owed their positions and their peculiar condition to her direct intervention. She would attend these castration ceremonies herself, watching as young men were transformed into beings that existed outside conventional categories of gender and sexuality. These eunuchs became extensions of her will, neither male nor female, neither capable of desire nor free from it, perfect instruments for an empress who understood power through the lens of sexual control. In the depths of the palace, Theodora maintained chambers that chroniclers dared only hint at in their official histories. Here she conducted what she called ceremonies of transformation, rituals where members of the aristocracy would be stripped of their dignities and forced to reenact the degradation she had endured in her youth. Senators would perform as she once had, not for public crowds, but for an audience of one, the empress who watched from behind jewelled screens, reversing the dynamics of humiliation she'd once endured. The psychological sophistication of these power plays revealed a mind that had transformed trauma into a precise science of domination. She understood that breaking someone's spirit required not just physical degradation, but the systematic dismantling of their sense of self. She would elevate individuals to positions of tremendous authority, allow them to taste power and luxury, then destroy them utterly when they had the most to lose. This pattern, elevation, seduction, destruction, became her signature approach to maintaining control. Documents discovered centuries later in monastery archives suggest that Theodora maintained correspondence with practitioners of ancient mystery cults, particularly those that blended sexuality with religious ecstasy. She allegedly sponsored secret gatherings where Christian liturgy was perverted into ceremonies of sexual initiation, where the consumption of bread and wine was accompanied by acts that would have been considered blasphemous by any orthodox interpretation.